In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do this painted canvas technique using the Timeless Tulip stamp set to get this unique look that looks like you've painted images on a canvas, and it's all done with stamps. The supplies you'll need for this project are the Timeless Tulip stamp set, So Saffron ink, and then I'm going to use the stitched rectangle dies. These dies have a variety of sizes, and I'm going to use, of the biggest ones, the second largest one. You're going to use this with a die cutting machine, and that will cut out the paper as well as leave a stitched line around the edges. The other materials you need are the Poppy Parade ribbon and some adhesives, including glue dots and snail. For paper sizes, I'm going to use an 8.5 by 5.5 white for the base, an old olive which is 5.25 by 4, and then another 5.25 by 4 piece that she'll cut out with the stitched rectangles. So I'm starting stamping here and adding the tulips to my stitched die cut piece in, this is So Saffron ink. You can use any kind of a light ink for this technique. Smoky slate might work, or Sahara sand. Also notice when I'm stamping here that I'm letting it sit and seep. This is a photopolymer stamp and you need a minute for that ink to transfer over. It doesn't matter that this is super light colored because we actually are going to sort of make it disappear. I wanted a curve on this one piece, so I just turned the stamp around to get that curve going the way I wanted. And again, it doesn't matter because we're going to be covering all this up in the end. So you're going to stamp all the pieces, including some leaves. It doesn't matter if they're not perfect because again, they're going to be just colored right over in the end. So next I'm going to take my blends markers, and I've got a series of reds here that I'm going to use to color in the images. I'm going to start with a light color, so this is light real red, and I'm going to just work in one section at a time. And I like to outline the item first and then color it in, and so this is kind of laying on the base color that's going to allow me to blend the rest of the colors. And I'm basically going over that outline and covering it up, so it's just become a coloring guideline. So the next color that I'm going to use is Light Poppy Parade, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to color not quite as high as the initial color that I laid down. And I'm not so worried about going out of the lines here because again I've just erased the lines, but later I can clean this up a little bit. And now I've gone with the dark Poppy Parade, again not quite as high as the initial color. So basically the colors that I'm laying on now are just slightly lower each time, so it's going to be darker down near the base. And that was Light Cherry Cobbler, so it was light real red, light Poppy Parade, dark Poppy Parade, light Cherry Cobbler, and then finishing with just some dark strokes of Cherry Cobbler down near the end. I wanted a little bit of lines because if you look at a tulip, it's kind of got some lines in it. And then what I need to do is blend all this. So I'm going back with the lightest color and trying to blend it in. Now if it's not blending, then you could go to a darker color, which I think I fiddle around here with this for a bit. In fact, really this process, it's never going to look the same each time you do it. It's going to, depending on how you blend, how high up you go, it's always going to look a little bit different. And the other thing is you really almost need to let this dry before you kind of decide that you are finished with the process of blending, because like I said, every time it'll look a little bit different and you may see that you need darker highlights in other places. The other thing you'll notice is I've done one section of each flower and then moved on to another one. That's just so that nothing bleeds out and it's got a second to dry. And then I'm following that same process for each of these flowers, doing the light color, adding in the dark, and so on. And you can see the shape of the flowers start to come through, and it's got that beautiful watercolored type of look. Now you don't need to use as many colors as I'm using here. I just really wanted a nice differentiation in the colors. But again, you could use 2 or 3 colors and that would give you a similar look. So you can see in here on the tops of the flowers, I'm adding in light colors and then adding just a little bit of dark for the highlight, so that again it really kind of pops against the main flower. The nice thing with these distinctive stamps is that if you look at the image prior to coloring it in, or if you look at the stamp case, you can see all the lines and all the shading and everything that's already on the distinctive stamp, and if you follow that, you're going to have a lovely image. It's almost like a paint by number kind of thing. So you can see I'm going a little bit darker in the center, again just to imply that, you know, it's in the middle, and it needs to be just a little darker to show that it's deeper, if that makes any sense. And adding a little bit of highlights I'm going to add in the end. I've tried to leave some of the edges white. If you look at the stamp, you'll see that there really is a line there. So here I am coming in now with the color lifter and adding that highlighted line back in. It actually takes a minute to kind of show up, and at the end I'm actually going to go back over it again, but you can do this as often or as little as you like. You can really see that differentiation coming in now. And in here where I want the petals to just be a little bit lighter on the inside, I lifted some of the color here too. So it's totally personal preference and how much time you want to spend on this, but you can really seriously make an image look very, very gorgeous and much like it's been painted. So I'm just recapping my blends markers here. I left them uncapped while I was working because I was working quickly, but before I go on to the green leaves, I wanted to cap them. So green leaves, I'm doing the same way that I did the flowers, starting with a lighter color as a base, then adding in darker color and blending it. The colors I'm using here are Old Olive, light and dark, and then Mossy Meadow, light and dark. Although I'm really doing just a smidge of the dark Mossy Meadow, because you can see when I add it in there, it is quite dark. So I've done all that, and now I'm going back and I'm just adding, now that the flowers are a bit drier, adding a little bit more red, dark cherry cobbler down near the bottom of the flower. And right here, I'm just fixing any little boo-boos that happened on the edges using the color lifter, and adding again some more highlights to really make those stand out with that color lifter. And again, once it's dry, you can really see that effect. And I added a little bit of highlights to the leaves as well. So the next step I want to do is add a bit of an outline with blue around the flowers, but I've got a little bit of bleed out here from a correction I tried to make, so I'm going to avoid that area right till the end so it can dry a little bit. I'm using the light balmy blue, and the reason I'm doing this is just to make the flowers really pop off the page. So I'm just working again in small sections and using the brush tip and just adding a bit of a blue highlight around the flower, and then I'm going to use my color lifter to blend that out so it's not so harsh and it's just kind of fading. So you can see the harsher line, and you want to get some color lifter on that right away so it starts to fade right away. And you can see now it's just almost leaving like a shadow on here. The smoky slate would be good for this as well as crumb cake, but because I thought these were flowers, and you know, maybe the background is like a sky color, that the blue tinge to the back really helps. And you'll see as you go on here that adding that pop on the one flower really, compared to the next flower, makes a big difference. So I'm just going to speed up the video while I do this because the technique is the same for the whole thing, and you can really see how it's already looking very popped. So after I'm finished with the outline, I am going to go back in with the color lifter, and again just make sure those white highlights on the flower are really showing through. That's my final step. Now the part that's missing here from the video, and the part that I did just before I started putting it together here, was I took the piece and I ran it through the embossing folder, the subtle embossing folder, and that's what's giving it its canvas look. I'm going to hold that up to the camera after. Hopefully you can see that really well, and that's what I think also helps to create that whole painted canvas look of this card. And I've just popped that on with dimensionals, and I've used my scissors to help get the back of the dimensionals off. I always make sure things are positioned well first before I attach them down. And I'm using the Poppy Parade ribbon. I leave the ribbon on the spool so that I can use as much as I need without wasting any. And I start with just a loose bow, And then I just fiddle with it, pulling it tighter, making sure the loops are even and pretty looking. And once I get it to how I want it, then I'm going to cut it off the spool. And I'm going to use scissors that, see, I have a ribbon on them that are designated just for ribbons, and then they keep nice and sharp. So I'm just kind of manipulating that bow and making it go the way I want it to go. And to attach something like this, you're going to want to use a glue dot, and you want to pick the glue dot up from the glue dot roll. And if for some reason they're not picking up, or they're sticking to your fingers instead, you can use a pair of scissors, not your ribbon ones, and attach a glue dot or two onto your project, and then stick your bow onto that. I'm going to use a couple here because this is a big bow. And then I'll just use my ribbon scissors again to trim the ribbon into a nice size. I like to trim my ribbon on an angle, just looks nicer, and it helps prevent fraying a little bit too. And then when I have them both even, you're all done. And there's the two side by side, the one I just made and the one I made earlier. Shapes of the flower might be a little different, coloring might be different, because every time you do this, you're going to get a different look. Thanks so much for watching. Check back to stampwithjen.com for other tips, tricks, and techniques.